The reason I ask you to do that, dear brothers and sisters, is that every 3 seconds, a child somewhere in the world dies from a preventable causes. Every 3 seconds in the world, a child somewhere perishes because in this world of affluence that we live in, we still cannot prevent the tragic loss of life that happens every single day on this planet. 50,000 men, women and children die every single day from poverty-related causes. In my country alone, 1,000 people die every single day as a result of HIV/AIDS alone. This is not a sad situation. This is not a problem. This is a passive genocide that is underway, or if you want, a daily silent tsunami. This situation calls for all of our efforts and all of our solidarity with those that actually are dying because of the failure of us to be able to share the resources that exist on this planet in a fair, equitable and just way. When we think about then the role of volunteering and the solidarity that volunteering can bring to reverse this trend, it's important that we recognize that volunteering always happens in a political context. As a 9-year-old in my primary school, growing up in apartheid South Africa, and this experience will be similar for those of you who experience living in oppressive societies. I remember the school principal saying to me and 2 other colleagues, you volunteer and raise the apartheid flag as we had to do on the flagpole. Too many parts of the world, the history of volunteering has been, and if you look at, for example, the successor states of the former Soviet Union, that was a similar practice. And when I think today about the inspiration to reverse that on volunteering, it comes from Nelson Mandela, when as a young 14-year-old activist, I learned a song which went something roughly like this: a volunteer of MK, a soldier too. Many have to fight, so why don't you? Mandela is a captain, so don't you ever fear. So come and join Umkhonto and be a volunteer. The point I'm making is that there are good examples and bad examples of who promotes and abuses the idea of volunteering. And today, Barack Obama is often quoting Martin Luther King when he says the reason he's running for president now is because of what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. And we are all called upon in a world of abundance to look at how we can ensure that all our actions can save lives, work for justice, and create greater equality in the world that we live. In the context of globalization today, what we find, sadly, is that in virtually every single country around the world, the gap between the rich and the poor is growing at an astronomical pace. If the current growth in inequality continues, the challenges that we are currently facing 30 years from now will look like a Sunday morning picnic. The gap between rich and poor countries is also growing at an unsustainable rate. Just to give you 2 statistics, what Western Europe and North America spends on pet food can provide the entire African continent with 3 nutritional meals every day. What the European Union subsidizes in terms of trade, unjust trade distorting subsidies, subsidizes every European cow to the tune of the equivalent of $3 a day, but half the people on this planet live on less than that. Of course, those of you who are from the animal rights organizations or from the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals might be getting a bit concerned of my going after pets and cows. I want to say to you that I also have a very wonderful dog called Bubbles, and I've got nothing against pets, but we have to begin to understand that addressing and talking about solidarity without talking about equality and without talking about justice does not make any sense in the current context that we live in. The reality is that globalization has delivered more winners than losers. And what we need to do, as Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, says, is we have to begin to work for an ethical globalization. We have to work for a globalization that benefits all citizens in the world in an equitable way. And we also need to recognize that when we, as volunteers, insert ourselves into the public discourse, what are the responses? There was a Latin American priest who once said, when I give food to the poor, I am called a saint. When I ask, why are the poor in the first place, I am called a communist. And right now we have to begin to have the courage to ask some difficult questions about how we can address the injustices that face our planet. Mahatma Gandhi once said, this planet has enough to meet all of humanity's need, but not all of humanity's greed. And today what we need to recognize that ordinary people in rich and poor countries are way ahead of their governments. If we take the question of international aid and the commitments made by rich countries to poor countries in 1970 to give 0.7% of their gross national income to international development, only 5 countries meet that obligation. If you look at the United States, for example, it's at 0.19%. But President Clinton points out that reputable surveys that have been done show that the sense of solidarity of the ordinary American people is significantly more generous than the leadership that comes from government. In fact, the survey shows that 65% of American people actually believe that the US government gives between 10 and 16% of its gross national income to international development. Those of you who are asked to stand from Europe earlier by Mark will know that after the devastation of the Second World War, the generosity of the United States through the Marshall Plan, where 1% was allocated to rebuild Europe, was what actually got Europe to be where it is today. And when you have a situation when thousands and thousands of people are perishing every single day, we have to ask ourselves the question as volunteers, what is our role in that struggle to shift the dynamic? Today when we talk about social exclusion, we have to be very clear that we're not simply talking about minorities of citizens. Yes, we are talking about people living with disability, indigenous peoples, people with alternative social orientations, people of minority religion